So, we're going to talk about how drones are changing the modern warfare. On this panel is Karl Eze, founder of Point-Zenith, Srdjan Kovacevic, Chief Operating Officer of Orqa, and Alex Schmidt, partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners. This panel is moderated by Danielle Sheridan, defense editor of the Daily Telegraph. Bring him on stage.
Hello, good to see a packed room here. I'm really excited to talk to you about drone warfare because since I started covering defence, I've been to Ukraine a number of times, and the big debate that was going on out there was all about the importance of drones and how it was really, turning the tide in terms of warfare and what soldiers and then regular civilians that have been trained to become soldiers were able to achieve. So I think let's just get into it in terms of, how crucial are drones to warfare and how is this changing the battle space as we see today?
Definitely. I think it's a really interesting point, and I think that many have made an analogy in a way that drones, and say the FPV drone in terms of that one-way attack, is almost akin to the invention of the machine gun and how it shapes the First World War. So other technologies are still around, artillery is still very important, but when used in concert, effectively it's had an effect of stifling manoeuvre on the battlefield, which means that actually your ability to use tanks, to use armour in kind of sweeping battles is very much stilted. Your ability for soldiers to cover ground is very much limited. It's just forcing them underground, just in the First World War, force them into trenches. And so it's had that same effect. And actually, it wasn't until the tank was created in the First World War and how that enabled manoeuvre again, where really battle became more manoeuvrous into the Second World War. So it's really quite interesting how we're going to break that deadlock in terms of manoeuvre now. And potentially that's looking at the drone-on-drone warfare, and you saw elements of that before the Kursk incursion, where actually you have to spend another layer of effort in terms of shaping the blinding of the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance drones, and creating that ability to then manoeuvre by blinding your enemy and then enabling using lots of electronic warfare and then enabling your forces to go through and have an action. And so it's very much that layered effect which is now vital.
Do you think the West has been slow to pick up on the importance of drones?
I think that maybe in some respects the West has been focused more on the higher tech element of drones rather than more high tech than right tech. And I always say that FPV drones, and I come from a background, I got into drone racing 10 years ago before it was cool. I started the Army's drone racing team in 2017. I wrote a paper in 2016 about the military application. But I think it's been the case that we've looked to the higher tech because ultimately FPV drones aren't that sexy because it's very much a case of, I always equate it to taking Occam's razor to a capability and cutting out everything not required to achieve the ultimate aim. So it's not always what we've seen as being the highest tech solution, which is a lot of what we generally look.
And I think drone isn't a new thing on the battlefield or in general also in the ecosystem. What's been so new in the last 2 years, what we've seen especially, is the fact that now you have commercial off-the-shelf technology that's being adapted on the battlefield very rapidly in a way where this rapid adoption leads to a change that Karl just mentioned in the way that warfare is being designed. However, in such a quick iteration that there's really no training around that, neither for the pilots nor also how to counteract on them. And that is something that we see that is new, and that it comes that shift from very high quality, very expensive systems to now a war of attrition where we have thousands of these drones being churned through the battlefield and being also procured in a very different way than they historically had been procured as armory or weapons.
You just said a war of attrition. There's been a lot of conversation here about the importance of Storm Shadow, needing these kind of missiles in order to win the war. But there was recently commentary coming out of the US that Ukraine doesn't need missiles because it has drones and they'll do the job just fine. What's your response to that?
Look, I think in the end of the day what's going to happen is warfare is changing, and also just the types of conflict is changing, right? And so we've been talking in the last 2 days very much a lot about multimodal warfare, and obviously, the tools that you have available will be much more proliferated. And what that means in the end of the day is that you need to assess each situation very individually, and the tools that you need for these situations. And drone can be a replacement for some of the tools that we have been using before, but they can't be the answer to everything. And they'll be much more integrated in, not only offensive actions, but also much more into surveillance and data gathering. And that is, I think, what we see more and more, and why companies such as Orqa are important in the whole value chain that we have on the battlefield. Yeah?
So they're more of the support rather than the starring role on the battle space?
I think they're very complementary to existing capabilities. So I often get asked whether FPV drones, for example, are going to replace artillery. So no, they fundamentally do very different things. Artillery is there to suppress, so it has a weight of fire that you won't be able to achieve as easily in the current day with drones. So the artillery fixes the enemy in position, and then the FPV drones finish. And you see that especially with armoured vehicles, where artillery is used to get mobility kills on the vehicles, and then the FPV drones come and finish the vehicles.
And also, there's this aspect of accessibility at the moment in Ukraine. FPV drones, there's like two aspects of it. First of all, this is what Ukrainians could deploy, because it's off-the-shelf commercial components built into highly precise kinetic delivery systems that can deploy these effects at ranges that compete with artillery, maybe not with rate of fire, but certainly with range. And then, that was available. And on the other hand, we need to be very careful when assessing the effectiveness of this, because, one aspect of FPV used for kinetic strike is you always, with every successful strike, you get footage, you get content, and this content is readily shared on social media, and you only see the successful strikes, because that's also part of how these systems are procured, not so much through regular channels, but by donations and these mechanisms which really rely on this communication channel to. So I think that we should not get carried away with praising the effectiveness of FPV, and we are an FPV company, and I will say that. But what I can also say is that the use of drones, small UAS, copters, has fundamentally changed the way the military has used unmanned systems. So we're not talking about anymore about using rather expensive systems, fixed-wing systems on let's say company level or higher. We're talking about using cheaper, attritable copters on a squad level, and not just 1 or 2 per squad. We're talking about multiple vehicles per squad. And before the Ukrainian war, this was not the case. It was fundamentally different. So I would say that if you're talking about drone warfare, I'm inclined to think that FPV is a thing of this current war, not necessarily the next war, but I am a strong believer in copters being here to stay in an ISR role.
So what's the big thing in the next war then?
We'll see. I mean, we could not have imagined the state of drone warfare today when the whole thing started in February 22. So the pace, and we've been hearing a lot these couple of days about the pace of innovation. It is really incredible how much systems have advanced, and to think that this has all been driven by technology that's essentially cheap and widely available.
I think when you look at it, we're almost then creating that analogy of what's come next, where you look to the Second World War, and I always use the analogy of the fighters and the bombers. You have the bombers trying to achieve the mission, the opposing side's fighters trying to stop them, and the fighters from your side trying to stop their fighters. You can see this interplay, and I think we're seeing the kind of General Rody Walker spoke about the dispersion of the front lines, but I think it's going to be the depopulation really of that initial line of contact, and actually the first battle, the first contact's going to be between the drone on drone, and when that war's won, then that creates the pockets of the ability for people to then maneuver for vehicles. So I think you're going to see just different phases of the battle and different use of the drones and different elements of operations.
Yeah,
Srdjan, sorry to interrupt.
And the brightest minds that we see in drone technology that are developing this technology forward, whether it be in existing companies or in new startups, is they're really thinking about this, like how to do drone-on-drone combat, how to counter UAS. Jamming and EW resistance is a big topic, and then obviously also training for foot soldiers. Right, today survival rates for drone interactions are fairly low. How can we change that? Right, and so we see a future where drones obviously will be used as an aggressive system and an offensive system, but where they'll also play a very important role in what we've been talking about the last 2 days. Basically, situational awareness is one of the most important aspects of a tactical warfare, and so drones can play a very important role in that. And we've been talking about AI platforms and the data that you're gathering, and what Srdjan just mentioned around drone warfare is what will be much more integrated in those systems, and we'll be learning so much from that. And it is the next iteration of that, I think, will be how do you use this data to basically adopt your strategies and your tactics in a specific situation than much more.
Srdjan, am I right in thinking that you are looking at building drones that are only made up of Western-generated components in order to keep China out of the picture?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the market, the general drone market before the war, and largely now too, it's been dominated by Chinese companies. You had one big company, DJI, that had 75% of the market. The rest of the market were system integrators, mostly Western companies, which were using components, hardware components, actually manufactured in China, built by Chinese companies to integrate their solution. And funnily enough, the software that's running, that's powering most of these other systems, you know, the remaining, the market share remaining after DJI, you know, took the majority, is open source software, largely developed in the West. What we are doing, we from our early days, we have been building those technology blocks ourselves, and we committed to actually, you know, doing as much as we can in Europe.
So I guess it's not by chance that we're sitting here on the panel together as well. I think what is very unique, if you look at resilience of our industry in Europe in total, is we learned over the last 5 years that in supply chains there's a lot of dependence on obviously the globalization of the world. And so what we have to understand and learn, especially when it comes to new technology, is that we might have lost the ability to either develop these technologies, or then even if we can do that intellectually, we might have lost the capabilities to produce them, especially at affordable mass, right? And so it goes as easy as injection molding in plastics, but all the way to motors, electronic components, chip design. And that is something that, you know, when we look at these technologies in drones, that we really have to think about of where do we have the capabilities in our supply chains, and where can we really build that up. And so what we believe as an investor is really important for our industries. They often look like a museum, right? And we look more like wardens that are looking at these museums and trying to dust them off, versus really thinking about the next iteration and the chapter of what would be in that museum. And we think that is supply chain resilience and really reshoring and nearshoring a lot of our technologies. And there's no way around doing that except with automation, robotics, and really going down the full value chain of really building up the capabilities again on how to do these things in an affordable mass situation. And that is why, you know, companies like Orqa that really fully vertically integrate from the software to the hardware stack down to the atomic piece is important. And we not only see this in drones, but we see this also in traditional industries now a lot more again.
I think, sorry. I think definitely in terms of supply chain is vital, but from defense side, there needs to be that demand signal as well to spur the market, spur the kind of Western markets to create the components as well. We're running the J-Hub Drone Academy, training FPV operators across all 3 services in the UK, And I think the common interlocutor here is Srdjan and Orqa, because when we looked at it, we saw that supply chain is vitally important. So all of our equipment's come from Orqa, and it's kind of produced outside of China, because that's the next part of the puzzle that needs to be solved as well.
So is industry working fast enough to meet the demand, or do you think there needs to be more of a quickening
I think there needs
response?
to be a bigger demand signal, and there needs to be a more concerted effort in terms of if industry doesn't see that actually it's not just about what's happening now for the Ukraine war, if industry doesn't see that there's not going to be a demand signal over the next decade, over the next 10, 20 years, then why put in the capital investment to get all the equipment to produce the factories when it potentially is going to be a short-term thing? So there needs to be the sustainment and the dedication over multiple decades, really, to this.
Yeah, and I mean, we've all probably read Mario Draghi's report on European competitiveness, which outlines that we do have an investment gap to build up these capabilities. As you probably can hear from my terrible accent, I'm German. And I think in Germany we learned this in roughly 2 years ago very well with the reliance on Russian gas for cheap energy, right? And I think we haven't yet really looked at all of our supply chains and figuring out where are these dependencies that we have. And I'm afraid that we will have at some point an awakening, because we would have companies that would have the capability to do so and work quick enough if, as you said, Karl, there's that demand signal and also that willingness ultimately to invest and maybe also to pay a little bit more. And I'm sure with automation we can bring the costs on a very comparative level and a competitive level, but we need to create that awareness first. Yeah.
On one of the panels yesterday, somebody said that Russia copies whatever Ukraine does. So when you're developing drones, how concerning is it that you're creating these brilliant pieces of equipment that are just going to be replicated by the enemy?
I mean, if the current state of the art of the systems being used right now, we're just talking about, hobby-grade equipment assembled by anybody with a bit of training and explosive device strapped to it. There's not much IP built in how it's built out. And again, I'll say the reason it's been so widely used at scale in Ukraine is the sheer accessibility of these components, the simplicity of these builds, and availability of the software that enables that. And this is the same technology, more or less, that's been available before the war. So it's just a matter of having these access to components, which is Chinese components for both sides. But when you want to go to the next level of integration to achieve the next level of performance, that's when the game becomes much, much harder. And that's when you can't really just buy these, black boxes and, wire them together to get a system. You need to get deep in each of those black boxes to unlock these next levels of performance that really differentiate system integrated system from a vertically integrated system, tightly integrated system, and that's when it becomes much harder to replicate. So if we keep, and this is why we're not so much focused on building systems that are just system integrated solutions, system integrated vehicles. We are working very hard on building more integrated solutions, and that's not that easy to replicate.
So the title of this panel was Drones and the Evolution of Modern Warfare. If drones are the future right now, obviously we don't know what's to come. What do you see on the battlefield today that might become obsolete?
Karl, that's more in your ballpark.
I don't think it's necessarily a story of obsolescence. I just think it's a story of shifting. So we always talk about the nature of war stays the same, but the character of war changes. I think what you'll probably see is more systems that are currently crewed becoming uncrewed, because that's just the general progression. Like, why do we still then need personnel inside tanks? Is a good example. And actually, if we were to take people out of tanks for the most part, you could redesign it to be something which looks fairly different. When you're creating a capability, yeah, you'll need something which can do the same role, but it may not look as we expect it to, and it may not actually have tracks. It may, so I guess there's an element of there'll be a shift in the design of equipment on the battle space, but artillery is still going to remain. You're still going to need infantry to take and hold ground. That's not going to change. But I think it's the fact that the layered systems of autonomous drones, which are going to be another factor which adds on to that. It's almost like one of the starkest images you see is, in some respects, when you see the trench warfare of Ukraine, it's very much of an older era, but it's layered with modern radio systems, modern drones. So you see the interplay between the kind of more traditional and the more modern, and that's, I don't think it's going to change.
Yeah, I have been in trenches in Ukraine, and the most bizarre thing was seeing, you know, someone practicing with their bayonet whilst also launching a drone. It felt like a real point in movement. Right, well, we're out of time. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys. It was great to talk.